Hey everyone, Professor Leis here. So in this video, I want to go through the prompt for the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project. So it's really important that you watch this entire video. This prompt is very detailed and it contains all the information that we'll be using for our project in our class. So remember, we're not writing individual, separate, distinct, disconnected essays like we might in a normal English course. This project is all one overall project, but it has different components to it. There are different elements to it, and we'll be writing drafts of these different elements where I'll be providing feedback. You'll be using that feedback to revise those different components. And then by the end of the course, so at the end of our class, you'll be submitting everything in its final version as the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project. Okay, so let me go ahead and read through this and I'll clarify as we go. Just a note, if you have any questions about this, you can always message me on Canvas or send me an email. But again, make sure you watch this whole video. You can watch it again and again. That's why I'm recording a video, so you can refer to it as needed. But just make sure that you go through the whole thing so that you understand what this project is all about. Okay. What is rhetoric, and how does it influence us individually and collectively on a daily basis? To answer these questions, we will set out on an intellectual and personal adventure called the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project. This adventure will last the duration of our time together, and it will entail several components, all of which will be contained and submitted in an electronic portfolio. So again, this is what you'll submit at the end of the course when this winter session is over, but you'll be submitting drafts of the different components all throughout the winter session. While you will have some latitude over how you pursue and complete the different components of this project, each student must meet a common set of standards to complete this project successfully. And so these are the course standards that I made reference to in the syllabus. To ensure timely completion of this project, students are responsible for meeting certain course standards by specific checkpoints throughout the term. A student's success in English 3 will be determined by how well they meet the various course standards by the time the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project is completed. So think of the course standards as for each of the components that you submit for this project, so the draft versions of these components, I'm going to fill out a rubric that will provide that rating, that 0 through 4 rating scale that we learned about in the syllabus. And so each of those numbers in that scale will refer to how well you have met that individual course standard in that specific submission. And so when you submit the first component, like I said, I'll go ahead and I'll review it and I'll complete the rubric. You'll be able to determine which standards you're able to meet already, which ones you might need a little bit more help with. Perhaps you understand part of it, but not fully. And then the ones that maybe you didn't really meet at all in that particular submission. And so that way you know what you can work on for the next time and when you revise it. And then again, at the very end of the term, when you submit the very finished version of your Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project, I will fill out another rubric, and that rubric will be the one that I use to determine your final grade in the course overall. So let's jump into the components here. So there are 5 components in total for this project. So think of this as 5 different kind of sections that all together comprise this project as a whole. So component 1 is the introduction to your Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project. What is this and why am I doing it? The purpose of an introduction is to orient your audience by providing important context and establishing the premises and terms of your project. What is the purpose of the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project? What does it set out to accomplish? How do you accomplish this purpose? What information does your audience need in order to navigate the different components and features of your project? While this component of the project will be the first thing your audience will read, you will not compose this until later in your process. After all, how can you be expected to introduce a project before you've written it? So even though this is component 1, it's not the very first thing that we're going to work on. Okay, so we're going to work on the introduction later in the winter session after we've composed drafts of some of the other components. Because again, you can't provide an introduction to something that you haven't created yet. You don't know what it is, right? So how could you be expected to introduce it to your audience? So we're going to compose this later in the term, but it's going to be the first thing that you include in the finished product, okay? So essentially, it's just providing an overview of what the project is, what it sets out to accomplish, how do you go about doing that, all of those things together. It gives your readers that sort of preview, that introduction to what this thing is. But again, we'll compose this later in our process. So component 2 is actually the first thing that we're going to work on. Or it's going to be the first draft that you submit. So component 2, rhetorically situated. Where am I? Anything can be analyzed rhetorically, including places, locations, physical space, and even time. Situate yourself in place, space, and time by researching your own history within the community in which you live. Have you lived in your current community your whole life? Did your family relocate from somewhere else when you were younger? Perhaps you've only recently moved to your current community. Whatever the case, research your current community. What are some historical events that have played a significant role in your community? What has changed in your community? And what are some ongoing issues that your community has been facing since you began living there? So this portion of the project is going to help us understand how our communities influence who we are as people, how they shape our identities, how they influence our values, how they kind of create us, right? So we're going to need to research where we live, so the communities, the neighborhoods in which we live, we're going to need to figure out some stuff about those places. If you've only recently moved to your current community, what values, traditions, and characteristics have you brought with you from your former community? So if say for example, you just moved to Long Beach, you brought a whole bunch of things with you, not just material things. You brought traditions, you brought values, you brought beliefs, you brought all these different things that kind of go into your identity. You bring that stuff with you. So what are those things? What have you brought from your former community into your new community? If that's the case, if you just moved here. Now, if you haven't just moved to your community, if you've been there for a long time, then this doesn't necessarily pertain to you. Using the city's website and other sources, conduct research on your city's history, mission, and so on. What are your community's purported values? How does your community espouse and enact these purported values? What evidence from your experiences and observations can you provide to support your analysis? Your city may not state its values explicitly. It is up to you to analyze your city's rhetoric to determine its possible values. So here, what you're going to need to do is whatever city you live in, you could just Google, type in city of such and such. And then usually one of the first things that will pop up is your city's website. Okay, so what you'd want to do is check out that website, read the different pages on there, look at the different tabs, the different things that your city has curated on their website. And from there, you want to think about the different values that your city claims to have. So a city might have like a mission statement, or they might have a tab on their website that says our values or something like that, something along those lines. What does your city state that it values? Does it value community? Does it value justice? Does it value environmentalism? Does it value creativity or art or whatever it might be? There are different things that cities claim to value. And what you want to do is look around your city and actually see, does the different features of your city, the different buildings, the different ways that your city's laid out, the different ways that the people in your community interact with one another, does that actually demonstrate the purported values that your city claims to have? If so, how? If not, also how? Why not? They might be at odds, right? That could be the case. Now, if your city doesn't outright state what its values are, then again, it's up to you just to determine based on your analytical skills to actually see, okay, well, they don't claim that they're environmental, but I do notice that they have compost bins. So maybe in that realm, maybe that could indicate that they do value environmental practices. So that's just an example, right? But you want to look around and see what are the different elements of your community that would suggest what its values are, okay? What are your own values, and to what degree has your community shaped them? What are the different aspects and characteristics of your community that have played an important role in the formation of your values and identity? Are any of your own values at odds with the values of your community? How might you enact your own values in your community in a meaningful way? So think about that. What are some of the features of your community that have influenced the things that you hold to be important? Your beliefs, your sense of morality, your ethics, the ideas and concepts that you hold to be important. So you want to kind of think about that. How has your community and the different aspects of your community, obviously your family may be a big role in your community because most of us may have grown up around our family within the community, right? So there's that sense, but also look outward as well, not just within the home or just within the family. How have your values kind of been shaped by your community? But then you also might want to think, do you have values that maybe your community doesn't share? If that's the case, why? How might that be the case, right? And then you'd want to think, how can you actually meaningfully enact your values in your community? What are some things that you could do in order to spread those values in your community? So that's something to think about. Communities depend on both the individual and the collective. How are your individual experiences connected to your community as a whole? So this is just a way for you to kind of think about specific memories or specific experiences that you've had within the community that can connect to some of the broader ideas. Maybe your community holds a specific festival each year on a specific holiday, or maybe there's certain events that your city often puts on or facilitates that you have experience going to and maybe have influenced your memories and your relationships with your friends and family because of those events, right? So you want to think about your own individual experience within the broader collective of your community. To address this component of the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project effectively, you will need to research your community in depth. Consult the city's website, local newspapers, and other credible sources specific to your community. Because you are seeking to situate yourself in place, space, and time, research physical features and sites of your community, such as monuments, parks, buildings, and other public spaces that play an important rhetorical role. You may also choose to research folklore and communal stories to develop your rhetorically situated story of self within your community. Aim to include both personal and public knowledge in your exploration. So again, like as I mentioned a little bit ago, it's important that you'll research your actual city's website. So find your city's website. Again, if you don't know the actual URL, you can Google city of such and such website, and it should pop up. But also look at some of the newspapers that are within your community. So for example, in Long Beach, we have Press Telegram. That's one of the newspapers that, there's local news that news source covers. There's also the Long Beach Post, which is an online news source, and that they cover specific things in Long Beach, obviously. But there are all kinds of different newspapers, news sites, news blogs that are specific to communities that you can research. And then you also might look at if there's specific colleges perhaps. So again, Long Beach City College, that's in the city of Long Beach. Long Beach City College has a newspaper. There's also Cal State Long Beach, which has a newspaper. So you could also look at those different types of sources to figure out information regarding your specific community. So don't just rely only on your city's website. Look for local newspapers, other websites, other things that you can find that would offer information about your community, okay? Now here where I mentioned, you may also choose to include folklore and communal stories. Sometimes there are different things that maybe there are stories that people tell one another about certain cities, or maybe there's certain kind of communal points of reference or cultural references. So again, going back to Long Beach, Long Beach has, there are a lot of hip hop artists that have come out of Long Beach. Obviously the big one is Snoop Dogg, but then there's also bands like Sublime, and those different kind of musical influences, those kind of help create the folklore, the folktale of Long Beach, right? So if you say, oh, I live in Long Beach to somebody who's never been there before, but they've heard of Snoop Dogg, they're like, oh, Snoop Dogg, right? That kind of influences the identity of our city of Long Beach. But also, if you don't live in Long Beach, look at whatever else might be relevant to your community. If you choose to, that's an option. You don't necessarily need to incorporate that. But you want to try to aim to include personal and public knowledge in this. So your own experiences, your own connection to your community, but then also incorporate historical references, historical information about your community as well. Okay, so component 3, this is the argument portion of our project, where you're going to explore a question or something that you are curious about and you want to explore it in greater detail. So argument, what do I think and why do I think it? Our opinions stem from our values in one way or another. How we feel about certain issues or ideas is often a result of these core values and the experiences that create them. What is a genuine problem, question, idea, or text you wish to understand in greater depth? So I'm going to pause here and just clarify this a little bit. So a genuine problem, so this is a problem that you are concerned with. You actually care about this problem. So independent of school, so disregard the fact that we're working on a project for a class for school. This is a problem that you care about in your own life. It's something that you're concerned with, okay? So that's what you could choose to focus on. Or it could be a question, so maybe a big question, like a philosophical question that you genuinely care about. It's something that you think about often and you want to understand it better. What is love? What's the meaning of existence? What is time? These are some big questions, but they could be littler questions too, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but questions that are particular to you, that you care about, that you are interested in, that you want to know more about. So it should be genuine. So either a genuine problem, either a genuine question, or an idea. Perhaps it's just a concept that you've encountered, or something that you've read about, or you've been watching, or watching documentaries on, and things you think about a lot. It's just this interesting idea you want to understand on a deeper level, but it should be something you genuinely care about. Or it could be a text. So remember, a text, this is from some of the lecture videos. a text is anything that can be analyzed, right? So it doesn't just refer to like a book, for example, although it could. So if there's a book that you recently read that really captivated your attention and it raised really interesting issues and, it has a lot of interesting themes and ideas in it, maybe you want to understand that particular book on a deeper level. So you could choose to focus this section of your project on that particular text. But, it doesn't have to be limited to a book. Remember, a text is anything that can be analyzed. So maybe it could be a particular style of architecture, or maybe it could be a particular music genre, or maybe it's a specific album, a music album that you really enjoy that you want to understand on a deeper level. That could be the case too. So whatever it is, it should be something that you genuinely care about. And if you weren't working on this project for school, you would still care about it. Okay, so that is a key thing. It should be something you actually care about. Okay, so let's continue on here. How does this problem, question, idea, or text affect your specific community? So you might think, is this a problem that's within your specific community? Is this a question that you have about your specific community? Is this an idea that relates to your community, or a specific text? So again, going back to the text idea, if you're interested in a specific manga, you could think of community not necessarily limited to just where you live, but it could be a group of people you associate with. So other manga lovers, right? So how does that specific text influence the manga community at large? That could be something to think about. How does this problem, question, idea, or a text affect you, your family, and or your intended career goal? So you don't need to think of all of these. You don't necessarily need to address all of these, but you would want to consider, how does it affect you for one, or how does it affect your family, or how does it affect your career goal, right? So if the problem that you're focused on is something that's related to your career in some way, you would want to research that a little bit, figure out that. What are some possible solutions to this problem, or ways to begin addressing this question? What is the best way to think about this idea, or to interpret this text, right? So again, there's a lot of opportunity here. It's open-ended for a reason, because I want you all to explore something you genuinely care about. You should genuinely have interest in this thing. But we want to conduct research on that and kind of figure out how we can gain some better understanding of that particular question, problem, idea, or text. How has political and popular rhetoric surrounding this problem, question, idea, or text affected or influenced how you think about it? Right? So this is something else to think about. Are there specific, if you're dealing with a specific problem, for example, are there politicians who are talking about this problem? Are there people, on news sources or news sites that are writing and speaking about this issue or problem? Maybe there's people speaking about it on TikTok or other social media platforms. You want to think, how are people talking about this, and how does that rhetorical approach, how does the rhetoric influence the way you think about this specific problem, text, idea, or question, right? To address this component of the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project effectively, you will need to consult a wide variety of perspectives, experts, and sources. How will you determine the credibility of each source? What points of connection can you explore among your sources? What about points of departure? Your goal here is not to prove that you are right about something. So that's really important. Keep that in mind. We're not trying to argue that we're right about something. Instead, this is your opportunity to learn about something you are interested in. The tone you take should reflect this goal. Seek to cultivate an invitational tone, not an adversarial, confrontational, or arrogant one. Okay? So this is something that we'll talk more about. We'll learn more about. We're not trying to prove that we're right about something. We're not trying to convince somebody that we're right about something. What we're trying to do with this argument is we're trying to be able to express what we think about something and why we think that. That's what we're aimed to do. That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to say, this is what I think and this is why you're wrong. No, that's not what we want to do, okay? Okay, so component 4, the rhetorical diary. How does rhetoric affect my life? Over the course of the semester, or the winter session, we will learn about several rhetorical concepts. One of the components of the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project is the rhetorical diary. A diary is an ongoing record of one's observations, experiences, thoughts, and challenges. As such, this component of the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project is inherently personal. However, this component should not focus solely on your own inward experience. Instead, seek to bridge your inward experiences and your outward observations of how the rhetorical concepts listed below work in real life. What broader insights or conclusions can you make by understanding these various rhetorical concepts? For each of the 4 rhetorical diary entries, you will provide a triangulated definition for the rhetorical concept. We're going to learn more about what triangulation is, so sit tight for that, but that's what we want to incorporate when we're researching these rhetorical concepts. Include an example of this rhetorical concept from your own experience or observation. Examples can come from any aspect of your experience, whether a written or visual text you've encountered, a social media post or phenomenon, pieces of public argument or discussion, a favorite song or poem, and so on. Explain how this rhetorical concept connects to the other rhetorical concepts and or elements from your own experiences or observations. So, what we mean by an entry, this is just a kind of a sub-portion of component 4, okay? So there are 4 sub-portions to component 4. So the first one is entry number 1, which will focus on the rhetorical matrix. So we have some lecture videos about this concept, the rhetorical matrix, so you want to make sure that you watch those videos carefully, you take careful notes on those. For your first entry in your rhetorical diary, explain the rhetorical matrix and how the 4 rhetorical devices, ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos, work together to create a successful argument or message. Analyze a text of your choosing that demonstrates how the rhetorical matrix works in real life. Be sure to explain how the 4 rhetorical devices are working together within this specific text, and why they make this text successful in conveying its intended argument or message. So that's what this first entry will be on. You'll focus on the rhetorical matrix. And the rhetorical matrix is these 4 rhetorical elements combined together and how they work together. And so, like I mentioned, there are some lecture videos that you want to make sure you watch carefully and you take careful notes on. But you're going to, in the first entry, you're going to explain what the rhetorical matrix is, and then you're going to find an example from your own experiences or observations to analyze, to show how those 4 rhetorical devices are all working together within that specific example, okay? Entry 2, you're going to focus on deductive and inductive reasoning. So these are 2 forms of reasoning that are very important to logic and to rhetoric. So in your second entry, define both deductive and inductive reasoning. Identify and analyze an example of each concept from your own experience or observation. Be sure to explain how each form of reasoning is evident and working within each example. So again, what you'll do is you'll define what deductive reasoning is, and then you'll go ahead and find an example from your own experience or observation. So it could be something that you find on the internet, whatever it might be. You want to break down that example, explain how that's an example of deductive reasoning. And then you do the same for inductive reasoning. So you'd provide a definition of what inductive reasoning is, and then you'd analyze an example that you choose of what inductive reasoning is and explain how that works within that example. Entries 3 and 4, they're each going to focus on different concepts, but it's the same process for each of those. So entry 3 and entry 4, you're going to define a fallacy of argument. Fallacies of argument are forms of faulty or flawed reasoning. Because they appear to be valid on their surface, they are quite common in public discourse. For your third entry, research a fallacy of argument. Provide a definition of this fallacy and then analyze 1 or 2 examples of this fallacy. Be sure to explain how and why this is an example of fallacious reasoning. So there are a whole bunch of different fallacies. So what you'd want to do is you're going to research online and learn about some of these fallacies. And then what you'd want to do is choose one that you think is really interesting or resonates with you, or one that you maybe have seen a lot. And then you'll go ahead and define that fallacy and then analyze 1 or 2 examples of that fallacy in public discourse. So it could be on social media. Going to X or Twitter is a great place to find fallacious reasoning. It's everywhere on that particular website, so that would be a place that you may want to check out. But it doesn't have to be limited to that. You can find it, examples anywhere, but you'd want to make sure to find them in your own experience. So that's what entry 3 is, and then entry 4 is the same thing, but you're just going to find a different fallacy. So you're going to focus on another fallacy that you find interesting. Okay, so that's the rhetorical diary element, component 4. And then the final component, I know there's so much information here, so thank you all for bearing with me. Component 5, which is basically the conclusion to your project. Why does this matter? So for component 5, you're going to sum up, basically explain what all of these different components of the project, what they all mean, how do they all connect together? How do they, why do these ideas matter? So let me go ahead and read this here. As with any composition, your audience expects a satisfying conclusion that underscores the significance of these ideas and connects them to the bigger picture. How do the different components of the Rhetorical Me project tie into one another? What insights have you discovered or drawn about the effects and influences rhetoric plays in the formation of your identity? How do or will these ideas influence your future? So in essence, you're really tying all these things together. You're showing, demonstrating to your readers what they mean and how they might influence, how you go forward in your education. So those are the 5 components of the project, and like I mentioned, each one you'll be submitting a draft of, and I'll be providing feedback on it, and you'll be revising it, and by the end of our course, you're going to contain all 5 of those components in the portfolio that you submit as your Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project, okay? Now, these last few things here are just what our project needs to encompass, what we need to think about and contain in our project. So argumentation, within your Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project, you will need to demonstrate your understanding of effective forms of argumentation. Among these forms of argumentation are Toolman argument, Rogerian argument, invitational argument, and rhetorical listening, inductive and deductive reasoning, and avoiding fallacious reasoning or argumentation. So these are things that we'll have lessons on and we'll learn about in our class, but you want to incorporate examples of these different things throughout your project in different places, wherever you see fit. Research. Students must work with a variety of smart, credible, and relevant sources throughout the different components of the project. Students will practice their critical reading skills by triangulating information among sources for corroboration and by reading online sources laterally to determine their veracity and credibility. So I mentioned earlier that we'll learn about what triangulation is, or triangulating. We'll also learn about what reading laterally means, or lateral reading. But again, that we want to make sure that we're conducting research for these different components of the project. Citation: all words, ideas, and works from other writers, thinkers, and creators must be cited according to MLA guidelines. Citations and documentation of sources should be contained in a complete works cited list for the project as a whole, or contained within each individual component of the Rhetorical Me Portfolio Project. As elements of your project become ready for feedback, you will submit them via the Turnitin application in Canvas. You'll want to refer to the policy on academic integrity contained in the course syllabus for more information. So again, make sure you understand what the academic integrity policy is. Project length. The combined word count for the entire Rhetorical Me project must reach at least 5,000 words in length. So that's for everything combined, okay? So that all 5 components need to amount to at least 5,000 words in length. All right. Assessment. The success of your project will be determined by how thoroughly and competently you complete the above components and meet the course standards. Projects will need to contain evidence of minimum competency for the course standards, which is indicated by a 3 or 4, to succeed. Because this is an ongoing project spanning the duration of the course, students will have many opportunities to demonstrate minimum competency on the course standards. But upon the conclusion of the semester or the winter session, students must have demonstrated a 3 or 4 on all the course standards to pass English 3 with a B or an A. Okay. So again, that just, going back to what I mentioned about the rubrics and how, our overall project needs to make sure that we're meeting these different course standards in the rubrics. Finally, just my parting advice: resist your familiar habits and practices as writers. Try something new and exciting. Follow your curiosity, take risks, and attempt to have fun while embarking on this journey. I really mean that. I hope that you all find some enjoyment and value in this. All right, y'all. I know that's a lot of information, so please, please, please don't hesitate to send me a message on Canvas. Email me, or if you'd like to set up a Zoom conference to talk more about this, just let me know. We can work that out. All right, y'all.